We're very glad you can join us today for the launch of the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook 2024, our flagship annual publication that covers the entire global energy system. I'm Jethro Mullen, head of the IEA's communications team, and I'm joined today by IEA Executive Director Dr. Fatih Birol, and by the two lead authors of the World Energy Outlook, Laura Cozzi, our Director of Sustainability, Technology and Outlooks, and Tim Gould, our Chief Energy Economist. So before Dr. Birol and Laura and Tim share their thoughts about the trove of insights in this year's World Energy Outlook, or WEO, I'd like to note that the entire report is available for free to download, read and explore on our website. So just a quick bit of housekeeping. During today's event, Dr. Birol will make some opening remarks, and then Laura and Tim will discuss the key findings of the report. And after that, we'll have time to take questions from journalists. For the journalists taking part in this press webinar, we invite you to send your questions via the Q&A function in the Zoom. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and we'll also take a 2-minute break right after the presentation for you to send your questions. And with that, I'll hand over to our Executive Director, Dr. Birol.
Thank you very much, Jethro, and greetings to everybody from the International Energy Agency headquarters in Paris. Dear colleagues, dear friends, today is 16th of October 2024, and it is for us, for the colleagues at the IEA, it is the World Energy Outlook Day. And we are releasing our flagship publication, World Energy Outlook, today. And I know around the world there are many energy professionals, colleagues in the academia, colleagues working in the finance sector, and colleagues working on the climate change issues. For them, it is also a World Energy Outlook Day. And this World Energy Outlook, we call it short WEO, is again a very important report. Lots of insights on energy, investment, climate, and other issues. And I would like to start my words by thanking my colleagues, Laura Cozzi, our director, and our chief energy economist, Tim Gould, and their wonderful, outstanding team for making this important study, which provides critical insights at a critical time in terms of energy security and our challenges to address climate change. Dear colleagues, one of the key focus of this report is energy security, as it is a core mandate of the IEA. The geopolitical developments in Middle East is very worrying. Worrying for humanitarian reasons, and also we have serious concerns from an energy security point of view. Because a lot of oil and gas is produced in the very region, and about 20% of the global oil supply, and again about 20% of the LNG supply goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So as such, it is a major concern for the IEA, and we are monitoring the situation day by day very closely. What is the situation in the oil markets and in the gas markets? This report, of course, looks at several energy security challenges. A major emphasis is on the traditional energy security risks on oil and gas, but also our report, the World Energy Outlook, looks at the emerging energy security challenges, such as the risks in terms of the concentration of manufacturing of the clean energy supply chains, critical minerals, key topics in our outlook. I guess my colleague Tim Gould will talk about that in a moment. Another area is as a result of climate change, we are seeing the extreme weather events are becoming much more intense and much more frequent, and they have a serious impact on the energy infrastructure. As such, emerges as a new energy security challenge. So we are looking at the energy security from different angles, and we thought as International Energy Agency, since the definition of the energy security is evolving and there is a need to have a common understanding among the nations, decision makers around the world, we have decided, together with the UK government, next April in London, to host an international summit on future of energy security. We will report this in the next days to come. So, dear colleagues, when I look at the report, there are many, many important insights. But I thought I share with you two of them, which I believe of importance for our today's, tomorrow's, and maybe the day after tomorrow's discussions and policy making for the governments, for industry, for analysts and beyond. The first one is the following. When I look at the numbers of the VIO, the World Energy Outlook, it is clear that about the second half of this decade, we are entering a new energy market context as the fundamentals of oil and gas sector are easing. A much more comfortable market context. Why it is happening? Why we are going to enter around the second half of this decade a new energy market context? First, developments on the energy or oil and gas supply side. In terms of natural gas, we are expecting huge amount of new LNG wave is going to hit the market. 2026 and beyond, and amount of new LNG, mainly coming from Qatar and the United States, will be about 50%, half of the LNG capacity we have today, a huge growth. On the oil side, we see that many new projects in key countries. They are all in America, so we call them American Quartet. In United States, Canada, Brazil, and Guyana, among other countries, will bring a significant amount of new supply. So this is, I believe, something that we have to see a major supply growth coming there. Looking at the second part, on the demand side, when some of you may remember, last year we said that we expect the fossil fuel demand growth will come to an end before 2030. Our findings in this World Energy Outlook do reconfirm our finding of last year. Let me take oil, for example. In terms of oil, we expect that the oil demand will peak before 2030. We will still need oil many years to come, and it doesn't mean that it will decline immediately, depending on the policies, but we see a peak and the weakening of the global oil demand growth. There are many economic and technological reasons. One of them is, one of the key ones is what is happening in the transportation sector. We are seeing the electric cars are penetrating the car markets in all key markets significantly. And globally this year, we expect more than 20% of all car sales would be electric cars. It changed from country to country. For example, in China, it is more than 50%. And we expect globally, in 2030, which means tomorrow, about half of the all new car sales will be electric, which is what China has today. And this would mean substantial amount of the displacement of oil consumption compared to today. So this is one area that the clean energy momentum eating up the share of oil and gas. Another area is on the electricity generation side, on the renewables. Very strong growth. A few days ago, we have published our renewable market report. Some of you may have noticed there. But what we see this year, 2024, more than 80% of all new power plants built in the world are renewables, a major growth. Again, in the power generation sector, we see, as IEA has indicated or forecasted almost 3 years ago, we are seeing nuclear power is making a comeback, a strong comeback in many countries around the world. And our report, World Energy Outlook, says that next year, 2025, we are going to see the highest nuclear power generation in the history. And we expect more nuclear power plants to come from different parts of the world. I guess my colleague Laura Cozy, you are going to talk about this. Laura explained us in more detail. So, dear colleagues, we are entering a new market context as of 2025, 2026. A lot of supply, oil and gas, demand is weaker, and the clean energy is moving strongly there. And what does it mean? What are the implications? There are serious implications for everybody. So our aim is the IEA team here to give these insights to the governments, decision makers, citizens, so that they make their plans, they make their choices accordingly. And therefore, I would like to tell you a couple of implications, possible implications of these developments. One of them is we will see the ample amount of supply is always good to address possible energy security risks. This is a good news there. Second, this a lot of supply would mean that we are going to see downward pressure on the energy prices, which in turn is a good news for many energy importing countries. And the third implication may be, again important, in a lower oil and gas price environment, the life, in quote, for the clean energy alternatives might be more challenging because they have to compete with a cheaper fossil fuel rivals. So this is something that we need to also pay attention to. So to sum up, the first, in my view, a major takeaway from this very rich, over 400 pages of World Energy Outlook is the markets are turning in the second half of this decade to be a buyer's market. Of course, these are all in the absence of major geopolitical developments, looking at the market fundamentals and data, as IEA always does. My second point is and something that is important for us at the IEA. We look at all the fuels and all the technologies with the same arm length. What we are seeing, dear colleagues, this is the second major takeaway for me, that the electricity demand globally is growing very fast, driven by many things. I mentioned one of them is electric cars growing very strongly. They need electricity, but also, especially in the emerging world, air conditioners is a major driver of global electricity consumption growth. Let me give you one example to put in a context. Today, in Japan or in the United States, 90% of the households, they have an air conditioner. But in the emerging world, these numbers are very low. For example, in Nigeria, only 5% of the households own an air conditioner. In Indonesia, only 15%. India, 20% of the households own an air conditioner. With the increasing income levels, with the increasing heat waves we are seeing around the world as a result of climate change, people buy air conditioners, which in turn increases the electricity demand. So this is a second major driver with the electric cars for the global electricity demand growth. And of course the light industry manufacturing chips, AI, and the data centers give a boost. So as a result of that, dear colleagues, we are seeing that after the age of coal started with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, followed by age of oil, which is with us today. Oil will be with us for many years to come. But the age of oil today, the world is entering the age of electricity. So this is a key message coming from this report. And as such, it is very important to see how we generate the electricity to meet this demand growth, and who will be the main actors in the age of electricity in the world. So, dear colleagues, I would like to finish my words, maybe one word on the emissions and climate change. I am sure my colleague Laura Cozy will elaborate on Laura, you are going to talk about the climate change. So, but just one number I wanted to mention to you, because we get these questions all the time. When will the global emissions peak and decline? Because we know that we are facing the impacts of climate change almost on a daily basis in different parts of the world. So we look at the numbers and we see that in many advanced economies, the emissions are already in a declining trend. In China, as a result of the clean energy move, we see that the emissions are under pressure, but China also uses significant amount of coal, and understanding China is very important as the largest emitter of the world today. But looking at all these countries and the other countries, the World Energy Outlook says that the global emission peak is imminent. But with the current policies, we do not see a decline of the emission trends even after this peak, which is current trends coming from the World Energy Outlook. The main scenario is in line with a 2.4 degrees centigrade increase of global temperature, which would have substantial implications for the rather fragile equilibrium of our planet. So these are some thoughts from me, and I want to thank again very much Laura and Tim and the entire World Energy Outlook team. It's a great team working with the other parts of our agency and many energy professionals around the world. We receive a lot of feedback, Tim, from the many governments, many industry players, academia. We talk with them, and their feedback was very much appreciated. And maybe now I can turn to my colleague Tim Gould. I started with the energy security, Tim. Maybe would you like to follow up that topic?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Executive Director. And indeed, I wanted to pick up this juxtaposition that you mentioned between today's very elevated geopolitical and energy security risks, and the underlying market balances, which, as you said, are easing. And this is already visible for oil. What you're looking at on the screen is the spare capacity held by large producers, and that's an important measure of the underlying balance between supply and demand. And since 2023, that's already increased. So our new oil market report came out yesterday, and they were reporting that it's already well over 5 million barrels a day of spare crude oil production capacity, and that's without taking into account any capacity held by Russia, Iran, or Libya. So that's an indicator of a well-supplied market, and you can see that that indicator is set to increase further to 2030. In natural gas markets, we'll talk a bit more about this in a minute, but you've already mentioned how there's this big new wave of LNG coming to market. Markets remain relatively tight for the moment, but from the end of next year into 2026, we do see that large expansion in LNG export capacity, and not all of that LNG finds an immediate home in our projections. And that means a reduction in the average utilization of today's LNG export facilities from around 95% today to something much more like 80% by 2030. Again, that's something of a buffer on the supply side. And it's not just oil and gas. There is already a large overhang of manufacturing capacity for solar PV modules. Over the past 5 years, deployment of solar PV has risen by a factor of 4, but manufacturing capacity has risen by a factor of 6. And we have a similar picture for batteries. So in both cases, we have this underutilized manufacturing capacity, and that is maintained all the way through to the end of the decade. And that's what underpins the finding that the executive director mentioned, that we're entering a different energy market context where we have much more intense competition for consumers and the potential for downward pressure on prices. And you could indeed look at this chart and think that the picture of relatively abundant supply provides a very strong insurance policy against energy security risks and price shocks. And of course that is true, but there's a couple of caveats, and I wanted to highlight one that was mentioned already by the executive director is the Strait of Hormuz. So that's a major maritime choke point for energy trade in the Middle East. So any disruption in the Middle East that affected those main export routes for oil and gas would also limit the effectiveness of that safety net, because most of that spare capacity for oil is also in the Middle East. And a major reason for LNG supply increasing is because of Qatar, which also uses the Strait of Hormuz to get to international markets. And in the case of solar PV and batteries, the caveat is a different one. That's the concentration that the executive director mentioned. A very high share of that manufacturing capacity is within an individual country, within China. And that concentration presents an elevated risk of disruption, whether that's from geopolitical tensions or extreme weather or even a simple industrial accident. So the overall message here, we are heading into a new market context marked by ample supply in key markets and the possibility of downward pressure on prices. But that's no reason for complacency when it comes to energy security, and we certainly won't be taking our eyes off potential risks to energy security here at the IEA. Let's dig a bit further into the outlook for oil. You're seeing here the picture for the past. So over the past 10 years or so, global oil demand grew by slightly more than 5 million barrels a day. And almost all of that was due to increases in China, road transport and petrochemicals. But that picture is changing, as Dr. Birol has elaborated. And why is that? And it's because China, so long the engine of oil demand growth, is switching to electricity for mobility and also switching to LNG for trucks. So global EV sales this year set to be around 17 million, and more than 10 million of those are in China. So the future starts to look very different from the past. So over the period to 2035, under today's policy settings, demand in other countries steps up, You see on the right-hand side of the screen, India, Southeast Asia. And I wanted to mention that next week we'll be launching a dedicated Southeast Asia outlook, and we'll also be marking a very important moment for the International Energy Agency and for international energy governance next Monday with the opening of the first IEA office outside our headquarters in Paris. That's going to be a regional cooperation center in Singapore for the Southeast Asia region as a whole. But if we come back to the slide, the expansion of EVs that we've talked about takes about 6 million barrels a day off oil demand in 2030. And that's a key reason why, as last year, we see a peak in demand around the end of this decade. And we did conduct some sensitivity analysis around this trajectory. What if EVs, particularly in Europe or in the United States, grew more slowly than we have in that stated policy scenario? Or what if EV sales grew more strongly, particularly in emerging developing economies outside China? And there are some signs of that in the data too. And this naturally pushes oil demand higher or lower in the faster EV uptake and use case. But it doesn't change our fundamental messaging around the shape of the oil demand outlook under today's policy settings. Wanted to move to natural gas markets. Supply growth, as has been mentioned, dominated by the USA and Qatar, who both nearly double their export capacity to 2030. There are questions, though, about where all of this new LNG will go. Again, if we look at the past, the big expansion has been to the European Union, particularly after the cut in Russian pipeline exports following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But also China, which became the largest LNG importer in 2023. Looking ahead, the potential for much more growth in LNG in Europe and even in China too is limited by their standing as very strong investors in clean energy and rapid deployment of renewables and efficiency improvements. So the largest growth instead in our projections comes from countries with rapidly growing energy demand in Southeast Asia and India. And there is legitimate uncertainty over how fast these markets will grow. They could potentially absorb more if prices are low enough. But we wanted to emphasize that these markets are very price sensitive, and imported LNG is a premium fuel, especially when you've added in the costs of paying back investments in expensive liquefaction facilities. And competition in those markets from domestically produced renewables looms large, as well as in some cases from coal. So in our view, the sorts of prices that clear the surplus of available capacity through additional coal to gas switching or greater use in industry, those sorts of prices are going to be a source of some pain for suppliers and traders. We talked about ample supply of many fuels and technologies, but not all projected supplies are abundant. We talk a lot with energy companies, different types of energy companies here at the International Energy Agency. We hear from them the areas where they have concerns. We've heard recently, in fact, we've heard for some time already about concerns on transformers for grid infrastructure, undersea cables. But what we wanted to highlight here are some bottlenecks or potential bottlenecks in the system around critical minerals. So this is the situation for the key battery metals and for copper, and copper being at the heart of a more electrified system. And we conducted a detailed review of all existing, but also the announced projects that are set to come through between now and 2035. And investment is picking up. And you see for the battery metals, which lithium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite, you have in some cases some quite impressive growth in supply over the next decade or so. It isn't the case for copper, declining ore quality, not a lot of new projects coming through there. And what this means is that with the rapid expansion of demand, there are some important gaps there between our demand net of recycling and the anticipated supply that we see coming through from different projects. These material constraints are not binding. They don't mean that our projections are unattainable by any means. But they provide a strong signal to policymakers and other decision makers that we need to close those gaps. And we need to close them by developing additional mining and refining projects, but we also need to promote innovation, such as more efficient battery pack designs, and boost recycling even further. And we also need to address those risks that the Executive Director mentioned, arising from that high degree of concentration in critical mineral supplies. And that applies to the projects that are coming through. So more than half of the new projects that have been announced for refined copper, lithium and cobalt are coming from today's incumbents. They're coming from today's largest producers. And the same is true for about 90% of battery-grade graphite supply. So resilience, diversity, those watchwords for energy security remain incredibly important here as well. And with that, I'll pass it across to Laura.
So thank you very much, Tim. And we are moving into a different story here, which connects a lot of the dots that we have heard up to now. So we are really seeing every country around the world charting their own energy history. But while doing so, they will continue to have to look at what's happening in China. And in particular, for this next chapter, the China electrification is one that we are watching very closely, and it will impact global markets. So already today, as you can see here, China is among the most electrified economy in the world for a variety of reasons, because of their manufacturing sector, because of their industry, but also for policy reasons. Over the past decade, for example, to combat air pollution in cities, the number of people that are actually heating their homes with electricity has doubled. So we are expecting to continue to see this push for electricity and electrification in China towards the next decade. And this is going to impact everyone. Why is that? First of all, is the huge amount of new electricity that China will demand. From now to 2035, we're expecting that as much as current US electricity demand will be added to the China electricity system. So the choices that will be made there will have implications for the entire world and for the world of energy commodities in particular. China today is the largest oil consumer, is the largest oil importer in the world. And this is actually weighing on the trade balance of China. In 2023, China spent $500 billion in energy import bills. To put a lid on this, this is one of the key reasons of what we are seeing. Tim mentioned, the Executive Director mentioned, huge growth in EV sales in China. We are expecting this to continue, and this continuation of growth in EV in China will cut out of their domestic demand around 5 million barrels per day in 2035. Is one of the main stories why we are expecting a peak in global oil demand, and understanding this part of the China story is going to matter hugely for every country in the world and for the global energy story. Similarly, we have to look at what's happening in coal markets. You all know that China accounts for over half of global demand for coal, while coal for industrial uses has peaked and is slightly declining. It's not the case yet for coal use in electricity production, and that's one of the key reasons why China today is the largest emitter in the world. So how is China going to supply this new additional electricity demand will determine what happens to coal markets, to global markets, and to CO2 emissions. And our analysis shows that actually the huge expansion we are seeing for solar, for wind, for nuclear, for all low-carbon technologies in the electricity sector will actually make China peak their coal use very soon and start declining. In fact, cutting out of global coal markets a very significant amount of demand. It's basically equal to current demand outside of China. So understanding the China story, once again, is going to be a key determinant to understand for every country in the world what's happening to global commodities. Now, the electrification story is not only a China story, it's really a global story, as the Executive Director mentioned at the very beginning of this launch, so much so that we are actually saying that we are moving at speed into the age of electricity. Why are we saying so? You look at the data for the past decade, electricity was growing, has been growing at a rate twice as fast as total energy. So if economies, we are starting to see electricity demand growing. EVs is part of the story, heat pumps is part of the story, digitalization and AI is part of the story. China, we covered huge growth in other emerging and developing economies. Dr. Birol mentioned the huge demand for air conditioning, but also of overall appliances in general is really driving up this demand in the emerging world, and 300 million new people will be connected to electricity in this period. So if you look at sectors, is a story of existing conventional uses. So we're talking about, again, manufacturing that is moving towards the global economy, towards more electricity-based manufacturing, being chips, being clean energy technology, but also new uses, so electric vehicles, data centers, etc., that are also growing very, very fast. How are we going to supply this electricity? So we are seeing probably one of the largest transformations the energy sector has seen in history. You see here solar, wind increasing dramatically, 7 times for solar, huge increase for wind as well. While this is happening, is supporting policies around the world, certainly, but it's also economics, more and more about economics. Today, solar and wind projects that are being built are not only cheaper than the alternative, but among the cheapest sources of electricity that we have ever seen in history. And this is clearly a very big driving force behind this global growth of these technologies. This is complementing actually other low carbon technology, being hydro, being nuclear. Dr. Birol mentioned we are expecting to see a peak in 2025, not a peak, actually a new record high, because we are expecting that nuclear is going to continue to grow as many countries are revising their policies over nuclear, actually extending nuclear lifetime and opening up for new nuclear installation. And it's true very much around the world, from China to Europe to the United States and beyond. So what does this mean? What does it mean in terms of global share of clean technologies? We're actually seeing a bit of a revolution here, because by 2035, 2/3 of electricity is going to be produced by clean sources, a bit of a reversal compared to today, where we are still seeing coal being the largest source, but going to be set in decline, very much, as we said earlier, a China story, and natural gas continuing to be a very important part of the electricity system, complementing more and more variable renewables that are coming into the system. So the picture that you see there is a picture where solar by the end of this decade and wind by 2035 will actually become the largest sources of electricity supply. Now, what's happening to the power sector is very much leading into what will happen to global energy sector emissions. So emissions have been growing, but under our STEPS scenario, what we are expecting is an imminent peak in CO2 emissions. Very much what will happen in China coal sector will determine this peak, but as you can see here, the decline is not nearly enough to meet our global climate goals. So this has been recognized, I think, everywhere, and in particular, this is the reason why at the end of last year there was a COP28 UAE consensus that has actually a very important energy part contained in it. And what we have analyzed is, what if we were to implement this UAE consensus? What would it mean for CO2 emissions? And the good news is that we still have our cards open to go faster, and in particular on 2 items. One is renewables, the famous tripling of renewable capacity, and on doubling of energy efficiency. So even in our STEPS case, we are actually almost meeting the tripling of renewable capacity, but it's important to understand that capacity doesn't equal electrons, doesn't mean that once we have installed the solar panels, the wind turbines, this new nuclear power plant, those are going to really float. We need to make sure that the enabling infrastructure is there, and that's why we have been analyzing what those enabling infrastructure are, and in particular two we have identified. One is grids. We need to step up in refurbishing, digitalizing, and building new grids to the extent you see in the graph. At the same time, to integrate in the best way possible all these renewables, we need to increase storage, being pumped hydro batteries and all other forms of storage. So in a way, how consumer choices and government policy will play out will have huge consequences, and we still have very much the keys towards going to a much more secure and climate-friendly future. And with this, I go back to Jethro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. So we now have some time to take questions from journalists. And as mentioned at the start of the press webinar, we invite those journalists in attendance to send your questions through the Q&A function of the Zoom if you haven't done so already. And please mention your media outlet along with your question. We'll just take a 2-minute break to give you a chance to enter your questions, and we'll be right back. Hello, welcome back. So we've got a lot of questions, and we're going to get through as many of them as we can, as quickly as we can, in the time we have remaining. So a few that have come in. We have one on coal and electricity demand. From Ronald Kim in Argus Media in London, who asks, do you see any temporary near-term uptick in coal demand, global coal demand, due to geopolitical uncertainties in oil and gas from the Middle East? And then we also have a question on hydrogen from Jacob Martini of Finance in Denmark, asking about green hydrogen. How do you expect developments to unfold in China, the US and Europe? And then also a question on emissions and the pace of the transition from Laura Williams of Bloomberg. The report says that by 2030, thanks to the pace of the transition, it'll be possible to grow the global economy without additional fossil fuels. How did you reach this conclusion? And is it a new conclusion for this year? So perhaps the colleagues can address these questions one by one. Perhaps Laura could take the coal one, Tim could talk about hydrogen, and Dr. Birrell could talk about the decoupling.
Peak question.
The peak question, right. Yeah. Absolutely. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Jethro. So for us, very clearly, one of the key uncertainty related to coal demand is really the pace of electricity demand, in particular in China, India, and economies in which the electricity generation is very much dependent on coal. We have been witnessing, Dr. Birrell mentioned this earlier, heat waves recently. Those were a major reason for higher demand in those countries. Maybe just give you a data point which I find quite impressive. In 2023, demand for heat waves was 2.5 times larger than in 1990s, and we are expecting this to happen again. So for us, really the key uncertainty whether coal is going to be peaking and how quickly it is going to be peaking is very much related to the pace of electricity demand in coal-dependent electricity sector countries.
I could take the question on the prospects for hydrogen. As many of you will be aware, hydrogen is already quite a big part of our energy system, so there's well over 90 million tons of hydrogen consumed today, but a very small part of that is produced from low emission sources. So one of the things that we do for the World Energy Outlook, but also in the Global Hydrogen Review that was very recently published, is to track some of those final investment decisions for new low emissions hydrogen projects. And those, we do this every year, and over the last year, the number of final investment decisions for hydrogen has increased by around 5 times. So if you've got well over 90 million tons of hydrogen used in the system, we now have final investment decisions for 3.5 million tons worth of clean hydrogen production. And that's split roughly equally, slightly more for electrolytic hydrogen, so hydrogen produced from electrolysis with clean electricity, and then also projects using carbon steam reforming of methane with carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Now, 40% of those final investment decisions have been taken in China. China, by and large, is what you might call green hydrogen, so electrolytic hydrogen. The projects in North America are tending more towards the steam reforming of methane with CCUS. In Europe also, green hydrogen, so electrolytic hydrogen projects predominate. So by and large, what we're seeing is that the projects that are to produce hydrogen, it's for use locally. So you're producing very close to where you'll end up consuming. There's a few exceptions to that, the largest one by far being the NEOM project in Saudi Arabia. But the connection I wanted to make is that you need to have the demand signals. And that's an area that we've been looking at closely at the International Energy Agency, because by and large, the strategies of governments are focusing on the supply side. Unless you have much stronger signals from the demand side for low emissions hydrogen, it's going to be difficult to set the signals that allow these supply projects to come through. So the expansion of low emissions hydrogen really depends on how quickly we can build up those new sources of demand.
Okay, mine is peak. You know, this okay peak. We said it before, but before that, I should tell Jethro that these webinars are press webinars are very helpful for me. I learn a lot, even here from Laura, from Tim. Very good question, excellent answers, very pedagogical, at least for me. When it comes to peak, no, it's not the first time. I remember, if I am not wrong, Jethro, last September, I think the year before, I wrote an op-ed in one of the well-known financial newspapers that we are going to see a peak before 2030. So when we said this, there was, of course, it brought a lot of discussion with itself. But today I can tell you what I see in terms of data and in terms of the other institutions, many of the other institutions' approaches, it is being confirmed and reconfirmed. Several major international oil and gas companies, in their own outlooks, they started to express similar views and converging with our expectation of oil demand peak. It is driven by many factors, both Laura and Tim explained, but the key one is China was in the last 10 years, China was responsible more than 60% of the global oil demand growth. China was and is the engine of the global oil demand growth, and as Tim just said, this engine now is switching to electricity. So this is one area to understand. Also, when we look at the annual numbers, oil demand numbers, 15 months ago, for the 2024, IEA said global oil demand growth will not be more than 1 million barrels per day. And again, there was a lot of discussion because we were more or less at that time an outlier. And I see that the numbers today, we are already mid-October, very much in line of what the IEA has said 15 months ago. We published our oil market report yesterday. Once again, reconfirmed this, and the market is coming close to what we say. People, the newspapers I read yesterday, it says a vindication of the IEA. It's not a vindication of IEA, it's a vindication of numbers and objective analysis. Many of the journalists and the colleagues try to make the IEA say this, other organizations say that. I think this is a rather a lazy approach, looking at the numbers, looking at the results, and the objective analysis is key. So as such, we do expect, and many others do agree with this, that the global oil demand peaks before 2030. But again, we will use a lot of oil after that. There is a need for oil in many areas, especially on the petrochemicals and others. This is it. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Birol. So lots more questions to try to get through. There's actually a few on that cover similar topics, so I'll try and group some of them to get together so that we can cover as many as possible. Obviously, one key theme from the report is the strong growth of electricity demand, and in that context, a question that's coming up a lot is the role of AI, artificial intelligence. So one question is, how big an impact will AI have on global electricity demand growth? And then another one is the issue of critical minerals and those supplies. A question, I think this one's for Tim, essentially, because it says your first slide showed a lot of new battery manufacturing capacity, but then you went on to talk about shortfalls of the battery metals. So how do these two findings fit together? And then quite a couple of questions, including from Junior Isles, from the Energy Industry Times, and from Lucy Pedrola of RSC Data News, asking about the International Energy Security Summit that was mentioned during the presentation, asking for a bit more information. What do you expect will be the main focus of this summit in London? Will it talk about fuels like oil and gas, or how to drive up clean energy sources, how to stabilize electricity prices? So that's really, I think, a question for Dr. Birol. So perhaps, Laura, if you could talk a bit about AI and its role in this new age of electricity that we see coming.
Thank you, Jethro. So absolutely, AI is probably one of the news items that is coming up and popping up on a daily basis. So we have started actually work stream on this a few months ago, and this Dr. Birol mentions always trying to be as data-driven as possible. And what we find actually is that electricity from AI today is just a very small fraction of global electricity demand. It's around 1.5% of global electricity demand today. And of course, there is a big uncertainty on how this will evolve in the future. I have my own kids that use GPT for their own homework, so I'm pretty sure that we will see increasing use of AI. The big question is how much electricity use will this need? We have an analysis in the World Energy Outlook that shows that it's going to be a few percentage points of the huge growth we're going to see to 2035, but there are largest driver at global level than AI, so it's not going to be the largest driver. So probably two other pieces of information here why this is true at global level, that the AI will contribute to the growth of electricity, but not be the main driver. At local level, this is going to have and is having huge impacts. We have countries like Ireland, West Virginia, where this is not a few percentage points, but is 20-30% of the overall load. This, of course, changes the picture for these places, and a large hyperscale data center is equivalent to adding 400,000 EVs, so it's a large thing. So to understand better all this, we are organizing on the 4th of December here in Paris a conference on energy for AI and AI for energy, so really looking at the two aspects, how much energy will be needed to fuel the AI revolution we're seeing, but also how AI could help the energy transition and energy security.
Thanks a lot, Laura. So next to Tim, those two findings between the different slides, how do those square, Tim?
So I think that's a very good spot to see that there is this very large expansion of proposed battery manufacturing capacity, but there is a shortfall in the battery metals themselves. So the first thing to say is that we have been expanding supply of those battery metals quite strongly. I think particularly lithium has increased very strongly in the last couple of years. But in our projections, we need 4 times more lithium in 2035 than we use today. So there's still a long way to go. And it is indeed true that not all of the manufacturing facilities for batteries have agreed sources of those. So what does that mean? It means that we're seeing, particularly among the larger players, a lot more vertical integration, new partnerships, both on the mining side, but also on the midstream side for the battery metals, so that they can have a degree of security about those supplies for their own facilities. But it's true that we need more, and I want to come back to a point that I made during the presentation. We need more, not just on the supply side. We need more on the technology innovation side, and we also need to be working much harder on recycling.
Thanks, Tim. Sorry, Dr. Birol. So now the summit. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, this is the last question, I understand.
I think so, yeah. I think that's all we're going to have time for.
So I think it was my fault. I talk a lot in the beginning, so because it was so many good things. Tim, Laura, thank you very much to you and our colleagues. It was difficult to cut it short, but maybe just briefly on this. Our core mandate is energy security. It is so. It will be so. But the energy security definition and the threats, risks are evolving. When IEA was founded in 1974, the oil security was the one and only preoccupation. And now, together with oil, the natural gas security we have seen 2.5 years ago in Europe, we went through major challenges in terms of natural gas security. So these traditional risks for the energy security is one topic, but also there are some emerging new energy security challenges. The world is going very fast in the direction of clean energy transition, and this would mean the clean energy supply chains should be secure. Critical minerals, which are very important for the clean energy transition, Tim just mentioned, needs to be available to all the parties, governments, companies around the world. There is another issue, and another threat coming from the extreme weather events, another risk for the energy security. So we thought we should come and look at this energy security altogether, and with bringing all the governments around the world. It's a global issue. No country, no organization, no personality can solve this problem. Here the international cooperation is very important to have a secure energy world, and therefore talking with the UK government, they were very accommodating and understanding that we organize it in London. I should here, Jethro, thank the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the Secretary of State Ed Miliband for their cooperation. We are next year in April in London organize this International Energy Security Summit, and looking forward to see governments around the world, companies and the others come there to have a global understanding of the current and the future energy security challenges. And with this, back to you, Jethro.
Thanks very much, Dr. Birol. So I'm afraid that is all the time we have for today. We've covered most of the questions and certainly gone well over the time we had planned. But if any journalists have questions that didn't get answered or want to follow up on anything, please just reach out to our press office and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. I do note there's one question that we didn't get to, asking about the impacts of all of this change we're talking about on the global energy workforce. And in that regard, encourage you to tune in next month for the launch of the Global Energy Employment Report, World Energy Employment Report 2024, which will really dig down into those numbers. So that's coming in November. And in terms of what's coming up next week, as the colleagues mentioned, we'll be inaugurating the IEA's first ever office outside of Paris in Singapore, and also launching our new Southeast Asia Energy Outlook. And as you've heard today, that's a really crucial region for the future of energy, for the future of the global energy sector. So join us for that as well, please. And it remains me just to thank Dr. Birol, Laura and Tim, thank the journalists for your questions, and to everyone following the event online for your interest in our work. The full World Energy Outlook report is available for free on our website, along with some really great online dashboards that enable you to dig down into the data. So do please take a look. Thank you and goodbye.